Urgent question. Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Foreign Secretary can make a statement on EU sanctions relating to Iran and the threat from Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Foreign Secretary, Mr. William Hague.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I attended the EU Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels, where Member States agreed a new and unprecedented set of sanctions against Iran. These include a phased oil embargo, a partial asset freeze of the Central Bank of Iran, measures against Iran's petrochemical sector, and a ban on Iranian transactions involving gold. This is a major increase in the peaceful, legitimate pressure on Iran to return to negotiations over its nuclear programme. It follows the financial measures the United Kingdom imposed on the 21st of November and the widening of EU measures on the 1st of December. Sanctions measures, often close to those of the European Union, have been adopted by the United States, Canada, South Korea, Norway, Switzerland and Japan. These are in addition to the sanctions imposed by the United Nations Security Council itself. At our joint press conference this morning, the Australian Foreign Minister announced that his country will replicate these new EU sanctions, and we will urge other nations to do the same. Iran is in defiance of 6 UN Security Council resolutions that call on it to suspend its uranium enrichment programme and to enter into negotiations. Its recent decision to enrich uranium to 20% at an underground site at Qom demonstrates the urgent need to intensify diplomatic pressure on Iran to return to negotiations. This is a programme that has no plausible civilian use and which Iran tried to keep secret. The International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed serious concerns about possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear programme, and Iran is now in breach of 11 resolutions of the IAEA Board of Governors. Sanctions are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. Our objective remains a diplomatic solution that gives the world confidence that Iran's nuclear programme is for purely peaceful purposes. We are ready to talk at any point if Iran puts aside its preconditions and returns to negotiations. Iranian Vice President Rahimi was reported as saying in December that if sanctions are adopted against Iranian oil, not a drop of oil will pass through the Strait of Hormuz. However, it must be borne in mind that 95% of Iran's oil exports, representing over 80% of its foreign earnings, transit the Strait of Hormuz. It is very much against Iran's interests to seek to close the strait to oil exports. Britain maintains a constant presence in the region as part of our enduring contribution to Gulf security. The Royal Navy has been conducting such patrols since 1980. At the weekend, HMS Argyle and a French vessel joined a US carrier group transiting the Strait of Hormuz. This was a routine movement, but it underlined the unwavering international commitment to maintaining rights of passage under international law. Any attempt by Iran to block the strait would be both illegal and unsuccessful. We call on Iran to answer the questions raised by the International Atomic Energy Agency, to adhere to UN Security Council resolutions, to suspend its enrichment programme, and to return to the negotiations, which are the only way of reaching a peaceful and long-term settlement to their disputes with the international community.
Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to you for granting this urgent question and to the Foreign Secretary. Iran is at crisis point. It is the new Soviet Union of the Middle East. It supports terrorism, undermines democracy, and is trying to stop the Arab Spring in Syria. But now we are threatened by an Iranian nuclear bomb which risks the security of the Gulf states, Israel, and the whole region. 2 weeks ago, Iran admitted it has begun enriching high-grade uranium. The regime now threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz, which represents more than 20% of internationally traded oil. The UK government could not have done more to try and contain this problem, with unprecedented action to isolate Iran's financial sector by the Chancellor and the extra EU sanctions imposed this week by the Foreign Secretary. But the question must now be asked, are we facing the prospect of a nuclear dictatorship in the Middle East? In the past, nuclear deterrence worked because of mutually assured destruction. But for mad to work, you have to be sane, and the Iranians have said that they would be happy to use nuclear weapons. Will my right honourable friend set out to the House what military action Britain and the Allies are planning in the Strait of Hormuz? Will you explain what will happen if these latest economic sanctions don't work? What more is being done to bring Russia and China to the UN table? Most would accept that Britain has shouldered its fair burden in tackling dictators. But it seems clear that the free world must send a message to Iran that if they continue with their nuclear plans, it will lead to military action. No one wants war, but tragically, it is looking increasingly possible. As the Times newspaper said today, one of the greatest civilizations in history has been superseded for a generation by an extremist regime perpetrating repression at home and aggression beyond its borders.
Foreign Secretary. Mr. Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He pointed out at the beginning of his question that there are many grounds to have quarrels with the Iranian government, although I stress it is not a quarrel with the Iranian people. But of course there's a human rights record, and much of the international behaviour of the Iranian government, such as the recent plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington, give grave concern to the international community, in addition to the nuclear programme. But it is because there is a very serious danger of wider proliferation of nuclear weapons across the Middle East, if Iran were to develop nuclear weapons capability, that this issue must be confronted, that we and our European partners and so many other allies take the strong stance